Амансыз, құрметті әріптес, өзіңіздің алдыңызға кезекті бір сұхбатымызбен шығып қалдық. Бұл да сіздің бір назарыңызға лайық сұхбат деп сенеміз. Бұл жолы біз Астанада зерделі компаниясының студиясындамыз. Енді зерделі компаниясына ерекше алғыс айтқымыз келеді. Одан бөлек біздің бүгінгі қонағымыз, ерекше қонақтардың бірі, сонау мұхит асып келіп отқан Барбара Оукли. Бұл кісі менің осы білім саласына, оның ішіне үйрену саласына бір сондай шырағымды жаққан кісі десем артық емес деп ойлаймын. Бұл кісінің ойлары, тәжірибесі енді көптеген курстарда, кітаптарда жарияланған, бірақ көбі соны біле бермейді. Бұл курстың қазақша нұсқасы да бар, кезінде біз атсалысқан. Соны да бір жарнамалау мақсатында және тақырыпқа тереңдеу мақсатында бүгін Барбара ханыммен сұхбат алуды жөн көрдік. Thank you very much for finding like a time for us. We are recording it in 8 a.m. If I say that you are the reason who sparked my interest in understanding how people learn or how children learn, I think it's it will be true. And let's start from who or how your spark in understanding how people learn is started, how you transformed from your engineering into cognitive learning. So let's little bit about your personal story.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Eskandir, for having me on this program. I'm so glad to be here. And I think the thing is that when I was young, I thought I could never learn math. I am not a math person, and I don't have the math gene. My brain is fixed. And so I learned another language. I learned Russian, which is не стыдно, я так давно не говорила по-русски. Это очень трудно мне говорить. But I learned Russian, and I learned it at that time, 40 years ago, pretty well. But I began to realize that the job offers that were coming in were simply, there were hardly any for me. But my friends who were engineers, they got really good jobs because of their technical training. So when I was 26 years old, I had always been interested in new perspectives and kind of learning new things, but I began to realize, oh, I'm thinking that my own mind is fixed, but yet I'm always supposed to be thinking of myself as open to changing my brain. So I thought, well, why don't I see if I can change my brain from being a person who knows languages but can't do math to actually being successful in doing math. And at age 26, I started at the lowest possible level of remedial high school algebra, slowly began climbing my way upwards, and now I'm a distinguished professor of engineering, and I love math and science. You would look at me now and say, oh, well, you're a natural. You're just good at math. But I never was. Initially, I changed my brain. And I think by being open to new perspectives, to be curious about things, I was curious about how the brain works, and I became interested in psychology and neuroscience. And it turned out that having a pretty good background in electrical engineering helps you understand the signal processing that's occurring naturally within the brain. So that helped me to begin to understand the neuroscience and also the psychology behind how we learn, how we think about things. And I realized that, gosh, people don't really know in general how their brain works and that they can change their brains. So my mission in life is to give people insight to help them, just as with you, to learn effectively, for teachers to know how to teach students based on how their brain really works, instead of just on sometimes theories that are a century old that are quite wrong in many ways. We've got new information that's really useful, and these ideas are the kinds of ideas that you and I both try to help teachers and students to know about.
Thank you. And I noticed that when you are starting to understand how your brain is working, it's like kind of empowering. Yeah, you get like confident, and you get more power to study new spheres or new language or something new. So it was like main idea, I think, curiosity. You should have like a curiosity. Unfortunately, not all teachers or even students believe that we can change our brains. Can we like deep into what is changing our brain, how we can change our brain, or why we should change our brain?
So, when we're learning something, we are making new physical connections between neurons. And it is a physical change in our brain. It's not all mush up there. And
Physical change, yes.
a physical change. So you have one neuron that, when you're learning something, it connects to another neuron and then forms a cluster of new memories that are related to that new knowledge or new skill you're learning. You can strengthen that cluster of memories by practicing, and then you can more easily bring it to mind. And one thing that we often don't know about is that retrieval practice is the best way of learning. Now, when I initially learned another language, learned Russian, I went to the Defense Language Institute, which is one of the best language learning institutions in the world. And when I was studying there, how do you learn another language? You practice. You don't just look at vocabulary lists. You test yourself. You cover up one side and see if you can say the word in the other language. What you're actually doing is seeing if you can retrieve that information from your own brain. So retrieval practice is a really powerful tool in helping you learn. And that helped me learn a new language. And I thought, if I try retrieval practice when I'm learning in math and science, would that help? It sure did, as it turns out. For example, would you sing a song just one time and think you knew the song? Well, oftentimes we give students homework problems, and the students will work the homework problem, turn it in. That's the last they see of it. But if it's a really important problem, you want to be able to work that problem, and you want to be able to look at the problem, and you could quickly write out the solution. In fact, you want to practice a number of times with that particular key problem so that eventually, at first you want to write the solution down so you're not cheating and going, oh, I know how to do that. But then you want to see if you can look at the problem and step through those steps within your mind alone. That's retrieving it from your own mind. And that is a good way to ensure you're really learning the material. And by doing lots of different problems and making sure they're in your own mind, you can begin to think more creatively and flexibly about what you're learning. Now, let's see, I kind of got off topic, I think, a little bit. So,
As a teacher, I think most of us believe that retrieval practice it's like a little bit boring. Maybe it's because we are not trying to educate children, but entertain them, and we try to offer something new every time, every classroom, and we're not like doing this real practice, I think. Can we talk about your approach to learning, about modes of thinking, what kinds of mode we have, why we should use it, and how we should use them?
Okay. Before I talk about the modes, just a little bit of wrap up. That's a very astute observation about retrieval practice can be a little boring. And it's the hardest thing to do. If you're looking at a page and then you have to look away and see if you can remember the key ideas on that page, it's hard. It's so much easier to just like underline or reread. Yeah. And then you think you're learning it. But by that retrieval practice, you get the ideas in much more deeply and you're not wasting time. So there are good generative AI. If you go to ChatGPT, or my favorite retrieval practice is there's a website called I Do Recall, and you can go in that, enter a PDF, and it will generate. You just press the AI button, and it will use AI to make all these retrieval practice flashcards, and you can get statistics on how you're doing, and it makes it more fun, a lot more fun. But let's turn now to the focused and diffuse modes. So it turns out that think about a bird. A bird has two problems to stay alive and pass its genes along so that, that species continues. Well, one problem is to peck to be able to focus and peck at a seed, for example. The other problem is to scan the horizon and make sure, if something is going to attack it, that it could come from anywhere. So you have to focus, and then you also have to scan. And it's thought that that may be responsible for the fact that most creatures seem to have two hemispheres. The left hemisphere is often involved in focusing, and the right, and both hemispheres, are often more involved in that sort of mind-wandering, diffuse mode, where you're looking at what's going on around you a little bit. So human brains alternate between their focusing, for example, when you're focusing on your homework, and you catch yourself mind-wandering a little bit. And it turns out that mind-wandering mode, which I call the diffuse mode, neuroscientists call it the default mode network. That mode is involved in creativity. And it's also involved in your ability to, when you're trying to figure out a concept and you take a little break, and then you come back to the concept and suddenly it makes sense. It's because there's this activity going on in that diffuse mode that is helping to make sense of whatever you were struggling with. So I began to really dislike math when I was 7 years old. And suddenly we moved, and suddenly they were very far ahead of me in mathematics. And I just thought, well, I can't get the math right now. I must be stupid. I don't have the math gene, so I gave up. If I had known how my brain worked, that all I needed to do was, a lot of people can't figure things out the first time they look at it. You just need to take a break and then come back to it. So knowledge of this focus mode and the diffuse mode, and that learning often involves going back and forth between these modes. If we teach students about that, it's like giving them protection, so that when they become frustrated, you have a little kid and they say, I can't figure this out, and they throw the book away. But what you could tell them is, oh, no, before you get too too much more upset, remember, this is time for you to take a little break and go into the diffuse mode. It's okay. It's perfectly natural to get frustrated sometimes. That means take a little break and return to it after a while. If we teach students about that, it will really help them to not just sit there and go, well, clearly I'm just not very smart about this stuff, and encourage them and help them to stay motivated in their studies.
I see. Can we say that learning how to learn, it's like learning how to make a break?
That is part of learning how to learn, is to learn how to take that break. And in fact, here's an interesting thing. We often tell students, oh, if you're sitting down to take a test, start with the easiest problems first because it will encourage you. That's if you haven't studied at all, just do the easiest ones you can do. I mean, that's the best you can do. But if you studied, what you want to do is you want to use the hard start technique. And what this means is that a student gets a test, quickly looks it over, finds the hardest question, begins working on it, and then when you get stuck, which is usually after 2 or 3 minutes, you pull yourself off it, go work on an easier problem, and then while you're working on that easier problem, your focus is off of that first hard problem, and your brain can work in the background in diffuse mode on that harder problem. So later in the test, you can return to that problem, and it will begin to make, you'll find, oh, well, the next step was naturally this thing. And you can make much more progress than if you waited until the very end of the test to do the hardest problem. And that's when you're stressed, you don't have a lot of time. And so using the hard start technique, you can make much better progress. You're also teaching yourself to, when you start feeling yourself get stuck, move on and work on something you can do. And sometimes students who are very capable will get started on a problem and they can't pull themselves off of it. And they'll waste the most of the test period just trying to work that one problem, because we tell them, be persistent, stay with what you're doing. But that is not what you want to do on tests when you get stuck. You want to do what you can do. So the hard start technique is a really good way to help students.
It's like being persistent between switching those two modes, yes? We are accepting or perceiving it as like a too narrow. We think that we should solve this problem. And is it like possible to be in a focused mode all time? Because I think our teachers or maybe some of our students are like always living in this mode. Is it like available or?
It's not a good idea to always. For example, some people will study and they're focusing, and then when they take a break, they do focused mode meditation. So you're focus. There's good evidence that if you focus all the time, it can actually suppress the activities of that diffuse mode. So that's why it can be a good idea to use something called the Pomodoro technique, which is also really helpful for procrastination. So what is this technique? It's a very clever use of focused and diffuse modes. And what you do is when you feel yourself, procrastinating, and you start to feel a little guilty about it, then what you do is you put aside all distractions. That means turn off that little ringing on your cell phone and no pop-ups on your computers. good luck if you have a 2-year-old at home, but do the best you can to get in an environment that has no interruptions. And then set a timer for 25 minutes. Focus as intently as you can for those 25 minutes, and then take a 5-minute break. But during that break, do not pick up your cell phone and start looking at, did I get messages? Because what are you doing? You're continuing your focus when you do that. And what you want is 5 minutes of kind of mind wandering, daydreaming, and that will help you to make sense of and reinforce. You're not conscious of this, but your hippocampus is reinforcing into your neocortex the ideas you've just been thinking about and learning about. So 25 minutes of focus. If you catch your mind wandering, it is kind of like a working meditation. You just bring your thoughts back as soon as you notice they may go off track, and then you focus for 25 minutes, and then mind wander for 5 minutes.
I also noticed that there are many people who can't let their mind wander. It's like one problem. We believe that we should be like always focused, and we are not allowed to be like wandering and maybe walking. We've used this Pomodoro technique, and I thought about like when you are thinking about result, like I should read, for example, 10 papers. It makes me procrastinate. And when I'm thinking about not result, like when I'm focused not on result but process, I should read like 25 minutes. And it doesn't matter how many pages. It like make me to be more like easy to start.
You're making such a good point there. You want to focus not on the product. In other words, I've got to read 5 articles or whatever you're supposed to do. You want to focus on the process, which is, I just have to work for 25 minutes. As much as I can do is what I'll do. So that's one of the benefits of using the Pomodoro technique.
First time when I was using it, I had such problem. During the break, I got some solutions, and I like breaking my break. Not like 5 minutes, but 2 or 2.5, and starting again, walking again, and in a focused mode, and not turning on timer again for focused mode, and sitting like maybe hour or half an hour in a focused mode again. Like it was a problem for me for changing, shifting between these two modes.
That's a good point. It's not a hard and fast rule that you must only do 25 minutes and 5 minutes of break. It's, in fact, what we know from neuroscience is focusing without distraction is really helpful for learning something, and that if you go longer than 20 minutes, see, when you even just think about something that you don't like, it causes a pain in the brain. And so that's why we procrastinate, because we think about something we don't like, makes us feel uncomfortable. So we change our thoughts to something else, and we feel happier almost instantly, but we've just procrastinated. So it turns out that if you focus for 20 minutes, that pain in the brain starts going away. So this technique, invented by an Italian in the 1980s, is a really good technique for getting you to focus without distraction and then take a break. But there's no firm science that says, oh yeah, you can only do it for 25 minutes. It just seems on average that's pretty good for people. but for me, I'm like,
We can experiment this and change it. I see.
yeah.
It's like help us to change our focus on from result to process. Like I want to say that it's paradox that when we are focusing on process, we are getting much more results.
Yes, when we're focusing on the process and having a way of looking at our work as, kind of time-based as a process instead of, oh, we've got to look at the product, which is we have to get so much done. That's very stressful.
Yeah.
So I find it quite relaxing to just do a Pomodoro. Sometimes though, I'll start a Pomodoro and then I don't have the timer set so that I hear it. I have it set on 25 minutes, but I turn the sound off.
I see.
I go back to look and it's like, well, sometime the Pomodoro has finished, but I didn't notice it.
Yeah.
But that's okay because I got, things done and I took a break when my mind said to take a break.
Now I'm using Pomodoro in a such way without sound. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how we can apply Pomodoro technique in classroom. For example, can I divide, for example, one it's a 40-minute subject in 2 Pomodoros or into several Pomodoros? How can we use it at class?
So, interestingly, I think that Pomodoro is often used by students at home, but you want to teach them about how to use it. So I know a kindergarten through 5th grade elementary school in the U.S., and they sent me videos of their students in focus mode for the Pomodoro, and then taking a break, for that diffuse mode. And they were, first they were all focused on what they were doing, and then they were having a really good time. So I think it depends a lot on what age level you're talking about and so forth. So if you're teaching microbiology at a college level, you want to tell them about the Pomodoro technique. Some professors I know actually go online and they'll say, at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock this evening, I'm going to do a Pomodoro. You can come on with me. They go online and they're just sitting and working. And the student can sit and work on their thing during that Pomodoro. And you're all kind of working together online and you're teaching your students, how you do it, and you're modeling for them how to do it. So that's one way to approach it that, doesn't take class time, but we can teach youngsters how to do this as well. And I think doing, for example, if students have to do a reading, you could do a nice Pomodoro 25 minutes where they're supposed to be concentrating on the reading, and then they get to do a 5-minute whatever they want, and that's a good approach.
Did I get it right? For example, learning how to learn, it's like being able to change between those modes. It's like I should control this process of shifting between these 2 modes. Do you remember you gave some examples of different scholars from ancient time that changed their mind, but it somehow happened accidentally? They were not like controlling it.
Right. So in some sense, you can kind of control. So you can always control getting yourself into focus, right? You purposefully bring yourself to focus. But when it comes to diffuse mode, it's a little bit like falling asleep. You can set the conditions for falling asleep, but you won't necessarily do that. So you want to set the conditions for a diffuse mode break by not focusing in particular on anything external. I mean, you can do simple tasks like if you want to sweep the floor or go for a walk, something like that, that's fine. But something where you're not focusing your mind externally on something, that helps you to take that break.
I've noticed it several times when children learning by heart some poems or something like this, they can't reproduce. They are struggling, but after having a sleep tomorrow morning, they like easily repeat what they should say, and it's a role of sleep, yes, in our learning. Can we like deep into this topic, how sleep affects our learning, or how we should organize our sleep?
Sleep is so important in the learning process. We think it only happens when you're focusing, but it also happens during that diffuse mode. And in some sense, sleep is the best of diffuse modes. During sleep, a lot of it's like consciousness shuts down so that the brain can do a lot of housekeeping. And some of that housekeeping involves reinforcing the structures that you started to build during the day. So you started to make those connections between neurons. And during the night, when you're sleeping, your brain can kind of go, oh, yeah, I'm going to practice with this. It actually repeats over and over again. In fact, a good technique to help you with that process of learning during sleep is not to put a book under your head, but rather right before you go to sleep, retrieve into your mind the key ideas that you're trying to learn or remember. Just do the best you can. If you're memorizing a poem, try to retrieve it to mind. And what that will do is it signals your brain that, hey, this is really important. And when you're sleeping, your brain will send signals over and over again, actually hundreds of times, through those connections that are involved in that thing you're trying to learn. And that's why when you wake up in the morning, suddenly you can remember it much, much better.
It's like setting our brain, yes?
Yes, yeah.
What about using different gadgets? For example, during conferences or at training, we see that people are taking pictures or maybe screenshotting some interesting information. But I think we believe that memory of our gadgets like a continuation of our memory. And actually, we are not learning. It's like imitating that we are learning. So we believe that we've learned it, but unfortunately, when we need it, we can recall it. So is it okay, for example, to take pictures, or how we should take notes, maybe how we should put information into brain in order how to set it in a right form, like?
So when I'm in a conference and I see something really valuable or that I think might be valuable, I like to take pictures of it so that I can later go back to it and see if I can retrieve the key ideas. So it's like that. That's what notes are for. You take notes, but the way I take it is it's sort of the modified Cornell method. And that's a fancy term for saying draw a line about a third of the, vertical line on the page, about a third of the way over, from the left edge of the page. Draw a line, take your notes on the bigger right-hand side, and then when you review your notes, put a few keywords on the left. Look at those keywords that relate to the material on the right and cover up the right-hand side and test yourself. See if you can retrieve the information related to that keyword. So notice what you're doing. You're retrieving the key ideas. When I take a picture, for example, I can with some of the flashcard systems, for example, I do recall, I can load that picture onto the platform, and I can cover up parts of the picture and then test myself. What did that involve? What did this involve? And I can uncover it. I can also load the picture on ChatGPT and ask it to generate retrieval practice questions for me. So it's, yeah.
Is it like testing that my brain builds those clusters or not? Yes.
Exactly right.
I see. There are too many topics that I would like to discuss with you, but we have lack of time. Let's talk about your new course for teachers. What new ideas or insights teachers can get from your course? I believe that we will be able to adapt it into Kazakh also, this course. Let's share some maybe main ideas or main messages of your new course.
Oh, well, golly, there's so much. So, for example, we talk about things like retrieval practice and why that works, focused and diffuse modes, and we also we try to give a good sense, for example, of why your face is so important and your hands are so important for teachers. So here's what I mean. We often worry that our students are not motivated. It turns out that in people in general, if you watch another person and that person is doing something like grasping something, your mirror neurons, those are neurons inside you that echo, they mirror what you're doing. So if I watched, or like when you're watching me and I'm grasping something, within your brain, those neurons that are involved in grasping for your hands actually fire, even though your hands are not moving. So what I'm doing with my hands, when I say, I want you to grasp the information, you are understanding what I am saying because your mirror neurons are firing that are related to you grasping, and that helps you understand the concept of grasping things, that I'm trying to convey. If I'm saying that electrical current is flowing like this, my hand motions are helping you to have a feel for what those electrons are doing as they're moving along. So similarly, when they found something interesting, when they inject Botox into people's faces, to make the wrinkles go away, people felt better. And scientists were really surprised. They thought, why would Botox make you feel better? Is it an antidepressant? Turns out that Botox paralyzes the muscles that make you frown. And because it paralyzes those muscles, you can't have a sad face so much. You can't frown. And we think that our mind controls how our face looks, but how our face looks also controls our mind. So when we can't frown, it actually makes us feel happier. And similarly, as our face controls our mind, our face actually sparks the mirror neurons for our students. So if we're excited, we're passionate about what we're teaching, the expression on our face is something they see and that their face mirrors. And your enthusiasm gets into the students because they mirror what is on your face. So to motivate your students, you want to be excited, passionate. Use your hands, use your facial expressions. Be excited. And your expectation of your students will make a big difference in how successful they are. So, for example, I used to teach electrical and mechanical engineering students about electrical circuits. Electrical engineering students were all excited about being there. The mechanical engineering students would sit at the back of the class, and they were always, like causing a problem because they didn't want to learn electrical circuits. They weren't there for that. So my expectation was that I would convert those mechanical engineering students into electrical engineering students because they would fall in love with electrical engineering. And because my expectation was that these seemingly bad students would do really well, I ended up getting in trouble with the mechanical engineering department because I was stealing so many of their students into electrical engineering. So your expectation as a teacher of what your students are able to do makes a big difference in how you motivate your students. And it's some of the worst students, the ones who can't pay attention, or, those can be the most creative students. I remember having students that, they couldn't pay attention, but I was always encouraging for them. And they would write me years later and say, I won the top award at GM for most creative product. And sure enough, by encouraging not only the good students, but the seemingly bad students, it makes a big difference in their lives. And it also helps you know that as a teacher, you're lifting all boats.
I see. It's like we're changing between cause and consequences, yes? We're not like accepting it right way. What about being persistent in this way? In applying your approach, this approach, I think I'm afraid when teachers, our audience, see this and try it, but didn't get result at first time, they will left it. Like it's not like working for them. How long we should stay like in this mode? How long we should motivate or work with such kind of children or students?
So that's
I want to say that it's like it's hard. How or where you can get this energy for this?
That is a very good question. It is not like there is no teaching technique that is 100% guarantee for every student. There just isn't. And if you try always to reach every student, you'll drive yourself crazy. Sometimes it is okay to do the best you can, but then realize that life sometimes later will help teach students. So here's an example. When I was in high school, that was the time when I hated math and science, right? And I remember I was failing chemistry, and my parents were like, go talk to the teacher. He will help you, and you can figure these things out. I went to the teacher, and I was kind of like this. Okay, buddy, see if you can put this stuff in my mind, because I can guarantee you won't do it. And I mean, I was like the worst student, really, just... I was convinced I was not going to learn, and that was that. And really, there was nothing Mr. Fry could have ever done that could have changed my mind. It was later when I got out into the working world and began to realize that my own closed mind about being able to change was the source of the problem, and that I needed to, accept that I could change my brain and start to be open. So it was life itself that became my teacher, in the form of I couldn't get the kind of jobs I was interested in. So one teacher can't affect every student, but don't worry. Students, let's see, when the when the right time is there for a student, the right teacher will come along.
Yeah. Perfect. Now, I think it's a little bit clear that when we have a lack of knowledge or experience, our brain is like closed. There is a barrier. What about having a barrier because of some knowledge? Because I have some experience or I read something and I believe that world is working in this way. But how I can change in such condition? How I can open these barriers? How I can open my mind?
So this is quite interesting. It turns out that the smarter you are, that on average, the less flexible you are in your thinking. So so my hero in science is a man named Santiago Ramon y Cajal.
Mine too.
And Cajal, he was the world's worst student. I mean, he was absolutely terrible. He didn't want to learn. He was convinced he just didn't have the capabilities. And it was only when he was almost 20 that he began to realize that no, he wanted to start learning. And and people later were like, what? He actually made something of himself? And not only did he make something of himself, this horrible student who was, if he was in any teacher's class, they could easily say, oh, he's worthless. He became a professor of anatomy, and then he won the Nobel Prize. And now he's considered the father of modern neuroscience. And they asked him, well, you know, how did a terrible student like you ever become successful? And he said, number one, it was persistence. In other words, not sticking always to a problem, but returning to problems and kind of working consistently forward. So even though he was a bad student, he was able to change his brain. And he himself said that we can rewire and change our brain. But the other thing he said was, I am no genius. And he was not a genius. But he said, I have worked with many geniuses. And the problem with genius is they jump to conclusions. And when they're wrong, they can't change their mind. So if we, like Ramon y Cajal, are no genius, rejoice, because we can still do some things that even geniuses cannot.
It's like mind shifting. After your course, many students, before the course, they thought that being a slow learner, it's not good. Something is not right with me. But after the course, they like, it's okay to be a slow learner.
Yes, in fact, because I'm a slow learner, and what that really often can involve, a fast learner can have a really good memory.
Yeah,
so they
like short-term memories.
Long-term memory. So what that means is those connections between neurons, once they make them, like if they memorize a vocabulary list, so they make those connections between neurons, they have a bath of neurochemicals that is like makes them stick together and that keeps them there. So they can remember things, but they can't forget things. And so for a slower learner, they memorize the vocabulary list, but by night, they've forgotten half of it or more. They have to relearn it. But when they relearn it, those connections form differently, slightly differently. And so this means they can change their thinking more easily. So slow learners, you know, we always regret, I wish I had a great memory. But the trade-off is that you can be more flexible, and sometimes there are really fast learners who are flexible in their thinking. And for example, my colleague Terry Sinowski, who I teach the course Learning How to Learn with, he's really smart, got a great memory, and also flexible. But many really people with really good memories, they not only are inflexible, but they because they're aware of all the little details, it can be hard for them to step back and see the big picture. Whereas for me, I can't remember all the details, so I have to grab the main idea. And it's easier for me to grab the main idea than it might be for someone with a great memory.
I see. I think I was a fast learner at school. In short-term perspective, it's like a good. You can get like good grades, but in long-term perspective, as you said, you have a closed mind, like a fixed mind. It's hard to change your perspective, your ideas, your position. But I think your course was one of the reasons to change this way of learning, I think. Can we talk a little bit about memory? It's used to say that we have a good memory or bad memory. Is it okay to say like this? Or how our brain, our memory is working, short-term memory, long-term memory? You have like beautiful examples in your course. And can we share a little bit of them to our audience?
Okay. Well, there's so many examples. I hope I'm thinking of the ones you're thinking of. So we should make a little difference here between short-term and long-term memory. So short-term is, it's like, let's say it's short-term memory is mostly in the prefrontal cortex, and it's where you're holding something temporarily in mind while you're working with it. So let's say that you're holding a sentence in mind in one language, and you're trying in your mind to translate it into another language. That's working memory that's doing that. Some people have a really good working memory that can hold lots of things in mind. Other people are more like me. I have a small working memory. So that means that I get something in mind, it's all there, and then, oh, shiny, something distracts me and something falls out of my working memory. It doesn't hold in there. But when something falls out, something else comes in, and it helps me to be more creative with what I'm thinking about. So, and then there's long-term memory. And long-term memory is, that's like where you remember your address. You may even remember some facts from school. It's things that you remember for a long period of time. So, so there's a real difference, but it turns out that if you have a big long-term memory about a certain subject, it can serve to enhance your working memory and make it seem like your working memory on that topic, at least, is bigger. So, for example, let's say that I said to an English speaker, "Здравствуйте, как вы поживаете?" And I said, I want you to remember that to an English speaker. They would look at me like, what did you just say? I have no idea, and I simply can't remember that. And but because I have a lot of prior knowledge about Russian, if someone said, I want you to remember that sentence, I could remember it with ease. So prior knowledge can help you seem smarter on a topic.
That like clusters of neurons that helping you from your long-term memory. It's like a serving for short-term memory, yes?
Yes. If you think of working memory as being like, I like to think of it, it's like an octopus, but instead of having 8 arms, well, like Terry Sanowski, my colleague, he's got like 10 arms on his octopus. He can hold 10 or 12 pieces of information at
simultaneously.
once. The average person has about 4 arms, 4 things, 4 pieces of information that they can hold. But if you have prior knowledge, it's almost like you're tentacles become stickier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember we had a problem translating this mind octopus into Kazakh, because in Kazakh, like we say it not arms but legs, and we say it like segzayak. It how we should translate it. Like it was a little interesting problem for us, and it's astonishing that our like long-term memory is limitless. We can storage everything that we learned, but it depends on how we are like using it. Are we building any system or not? And on this, it's based how we can recall or not recall information. Maybe a final question. I believe that our audience is mostly young teachers who are only starting to work at schools, and now they have a motivation, maybe to change something, to change world, maybe to change child in front of them. But I'm afraid that after some time, this motivation will decrease. What kind of advice can you give to them in order to keep it, and how to empower themselves and the children in front of them? Like maybe 1 or 2, 3 advices.
Oh, gosh. I think the main thing is, so for example, the kind of wonderful learning materials that you are creating, they can help keep us inspired. Motivation is a little bit like, it's like our day-to-day life. We can take a shower once and we're clean, but the next day we kind of need to take a shower again, right? We need to kind of constantly keep ourselves clean by, washing ourselves. And motivation is a little bit like keeping ourselves clean. It's you can't just get one dose of motivation and then that's all you need for the rest of your life. You need additional bits of motivation to help keep you buoyed upwards. And so taking on classes online is a wonderful way to help keep yourself motivated, especially with some of the best insights that that neuroscientists know. That, see, it can be really hard for you as a teacher. You're working with students. You have a big, full job to do. And so it can be hard to find good information that can inform you about the latest of research. Because how do you find teachers that know neuroscience, that know about teaching, that know about cognitive psychology, and that know about things like mathematics and learning languages? How do you find these teachers that can put it all together? Yeah. There are a few rare people that do it. And how do you find a good team that can put together a great course in Kazakh? Well, looking at your courses can help keep you refreshed, keep you motivated. And the really important thing here is new neurons are born every day, especially in the hippocampus. Those new neurons will die if you're not learning something new. But if you're learning something, those new neurons have a place to hook into in that lattice. They have a need to hook together if you're learning something. New neurons have special qualities, whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old. Those new neurons that are being born, they help you learn better and they help you feel better. So new learning can help not only help you with your learning altogether because of these new neurons, they can help you feel better. So what are teachers doing? They're helping students, no matter what their grumbling may be, to feel better. And that will boost the mood of the nation.
Applause. I think it's a great advice. Thank you. Unfortunately, we're lack of time. We should finish. I believe that this interview also will be one of the reasons. It's like it will be like a shower, another shower to empower my motivation. Құрметті көрермендер, сіздерге енді қысқа болса да бір пайдалы болды деген үміттемін. Сіздердің уақыттарыңызға, назарларыңызға лайық дүниесін алсақ, сіздің дамуыңыздың, алдыға басуыңыздың біз тұғыры бола алсақ қуанамыз. Әсерлеріңізбен, ойларыңызбен бөлісе отырыңыздар, және осы бір ақпаратты лайықты деп тапсаңыз таратып отырыңыздар. Рахмет. Болашақ сұхбаттарда жүздескенше. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate your enthusiasm.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's like your first interview in Kazakhstan. No, despite this course.